Willoughby East Lake City Schools Board of Education. It is Tuesday evening, December 3rd, 2019. We are at the administrative offices at 35353 Curtis Boulevard, East Lake, Ohio, and it's about 4 minutes after 7 p.m. Mr. Parkinson, will you call the roll?
Dr. Beal? Here. Mr. Jones? Here. Mrs. Pruczynski?
Here.
Mrs. Warner?
Here.
Mrs. Ern?
Here.
Thank you. This is a work session, so this is not, this is for the benefit of the board to get some information and anyone here in the public to get some information. There is no public discourse, there is no discussion at a work session. So if you would have questions for us, please wait until after the meeting. This is our chance to make some decisions and hear some information that we may not have heard already. So with that being said, Mr. Thompson, I believe you have a presentation for us.
Along with Mr. Parkinson, yes ma'am.
Oh, well, thank you, Mr. Parkinson. You got your voice back. You got your voice back. That's good.
Whoops.
Yes, after.
I hit a button, sorry.
Okay.
No, there it came back on.
All right. We talked about this.
I know, such technology. Well, thank you all for coming, and some of this information will be review, and some of this information that Bill and I will share is new information or culmination of summary of the survey that the community had participated in. So we're talking about, again, reviewing cuts, type of levy in March, which is the big decision for the school board tonight. A look at, can those November levy cuts return? If so, when? And what can we do to help? So we've seen these before. That first set of numbers on your left. Again, I would say we met this morning with the building staff, and I know every time I flash up numbers, the treasurer goes into slight convulsions that people may misinterpret that those numbers, because I think a lot of people look at the numbers and think, well, those numbers are locked in no matter what, and they're not, because the treasurer's job is actually extremely difficult when it comes to forecasting. So just for example, as part of trying to determine revenue, treasurer's got to determine, based on past history, how many people are going to pay their taxes and how many people aren't, for example. So what's the collection rate going to be? What's the state legislature going to do with state's funding? Looking into that crystal ball and trying to determine that. And then secondly, or thirdly, the other, I think, large area that's difficult to forecast is we are self-insured on our health insurance, and those rates I've seen them go from one year to the next at 0, and I've seen them go from one year to the next at 32 or 33% increase. We're forecasting 11% currently in the forecast, which is about, he certainly hasn't built a lot of fat into that, let's just say, because that's about where we've been over the last 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, in fact, I had a conversation with DS Benefits, who is our benefits administrator, and when I was preparing the forecast, I reached out to them and said 11%, I said still good, reasonable, unreasonable, and they think based on our claims history that 11% is a reasonable number to put into the forecast. But as Steve says, maybe next year it's 12 or 13, or maybe it's 10. You don't know. You have to wait till you get your history of claims costs and decide from year to year.
And just a couple of percents could swing hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's not a little bit amount of money. It could be, it's a lot of money. It could be, again, I've seen it swing over $1 million easily. So that's why it's difficult to forecast. But what the 5-year forecast does show you, what it's excellent for is that forecast isn't going to fluctuate enough to change the reality of what we're looking at. It may change $1 million to the positive, it may change $1 million to the negative, but that's about as much as it's probably going to swing. So when you look at that first forecast to your left, as a reminder, that's no cuts and no levy passage, and that's the financial picture that we're currently looking at. So we are obviously in deficit spending, and it's not a good situation to be in. The 5-year forecast to your right is no Soy High School, but still no levy passage. While it makes a difference of $1 million or so on the back end of the 5-year forecast, there were some that believe if we just closed Soy High School that our financial problems would be solved, and it's just simply not true. The next 5-year forecast you're looking at is, well, if we pass in March, all is well. It's not. And remember, because we didn't pass this past November, that leaves us in 1 year of additional deficit spending, coupled with losing around $8.5 million in loss of collections. So it's a double whammy as a result of that, because if we passed in November, collections would have began when? January 2020. Now we pass in March, collections don't begin, half collection until January 2021. And that therein lies part of the pressure that that's putting on the current 5-year forecast. So if we were to go with this 5-year, if we were to go with this, no cuts, just bring everything back, the treasurer would want to be back on the ballot in 2021. We would arm wrestle, I would win, and we would be back on the ballot in 2022. But I would submit to you, anyone here, would after passing a levy in 2020 to come back with new money 2 years later would be financial suicide. That would not pass. But that's what the 5-year forecast would call for. The forecast to your right, which is the best forecast that we have in all of our simulations, is still not great. The numbers are going down, so what's that tell you? We're in deficit spending already. So that is assuming levy passage, $2 million in cuts that we made. That has, of course, been consternation in the community, coupled with House Bill 305. What's House Bill 305? Remember, that's the funding, the new funding formula that is still in committee, has to go to both sides of the House and the Senate at the state level, and then to the governor's office and be signed. A number of things could happen between now and then.
Yep.
So
That assumes full implementation of 305 as it's currently constituted. Maybe they might implement it at 20% or 50% or 75%. You know, I don't know.
but that is the best outlook, and that still has us back on the ballot in 2024, because 2025 is a negative number. So that's what we're looking at currently. So the reality is, you need to increase the ask or increase the cuts. So the 5-year forecast summary, here they all are just sort of stacked on top of one another. And you can see what they're projecting out to be. To put it in perspective, you want to just give them just a little brief about how compared to Mentor, for example. How do we stack up compared to Mentor? Mentor have students of about 500 less students than us.
Mentor in this fiscal year, if you look at line 702, is sitting on $72 million. And that same line in fiscal 24, they're at $41 million. And I'm going to probably place a lot of money that Mentor will be on the ballot between now and 2024 to get their cash balance up. Orange City Schools, they have high cash balances. Mayfield City Schools, high cash balances. Warrensville City, high cash balances. Beechwood, I believe, has high cash. Solon. There are a number of districts, and that's how districts should be run, with higher cash balances. To put it in perspective, $7.5 million, I could operate the school district for 8 days. That's what it means to me. 8 days of operation, and then that's it, I'm done. Mentor Schools, they're $72 million. That represents over 300 days of operating cash. We're sitting at 8.
So in my previous district, our total budget's about 140 million. In my previous district, it was about 35 million. And there they never go below 20 million in cash reserves.
Orange City Schools has the same policy. I think their cash is somewhere in the $20 million range. If they sniff 20 million bucks, thereabouts, they're on the ballot.
In my time here, this is my 9th year here, we've never had $20 million in cash reserves ever.
17 million was the highest we've ever achieved.
So what are the current cuts based upon? These were the priorities. Protect core academic course offerings, which we did not impact. The least impact on students from an academic perspective. Students are certainly impacted, but they're not impacted from the core offerings that are available to them. And then of course hit those budgetary numbers. So again, just to review, there was a lot of discussion about, well, were things divided equally between athletics and non-athletics? They were cut right down the middle. And I think what you're also viewing here, of the 2 million in cuts that were made, these are the cuts that make everyone upset. These are the cuts that are directly impacting students. And so we're going to address the question, can these things return? I think on a March levy passage, these things are the ones that I believe need to return. The challenge is that if these return, that's around $950,000. That means $950,000 has to come from somewhere else.
The other questions on the list is, will it come back this school year or starting next school year?
The vast majority of these cuts, like freshman athletic programs, we would bring track back in the spring, so that's all you have athletically in middle schools. Freshman athletic programs, the only freshman sport that you have that is strictly a freshman sport is baseball. So yes. And then on the other side, those would come back and be in place.
But that's only if we can find somewhere else to get that money.
We
So,
have to cut
something.
$1 million from somewhere else.
Okay.
And we're working on that. Our plan is to be able to present that plan. The cabinet has been working on that for a month now, going through everything. We're meeting with building level principals, et cetera, et cetera. We plan to have a plan in place and present it back to the board, certainly in January, so that you would know, well, if these are coming back, what's leaving? 80% of our budget, of course, is what? People, and payroll and benefits. So the other 20% is difficult. We already cut $1 million of that out after the August failure. That will stay in place.
I'd say 2, 3, 4% of your total budget is discretionary out of 104 million. There really isn't a lot.
So, if you were to take those things and just put them back in place, but not make any additional cuts, this is what our 5-year forecast would look like. So again, this would put us back on the ballot in 2023 at the very latest. At the very latest. And that is not, again, that is not a position I want to be in, because also to put pressure on the situation, what begins in 2022? Levy renewals, exactly. Our levy renewal cycle. So, what the board has to make a determination on it, this is the crux of it all. A continuing levy or an emergency operating levy. Okay, so what is the difference between those two? A continuing levy is a fixed dollar amount for an indefinite period of time. So, I've heard people, that's what we've tried in August, and that's what we tried in November. It appears as millage on the ballot. I've heard people say, well, that's a blank check. It's not a blank check. It's not a blank check at all. It's a set dollar amount each year, but you don't ever come back and renew it. It is continuing in perpetuity. An emergency operating levy is a fixed dollar amount for a fixed amount of time and must be renewed by the voters, and it appears as dollars. But I hope, obviously the board can choose to do whatever it would like. I would propose that the ask would be the same millage converted to dollars, which is roughly $8.5 million. Then the county auditor will then turn that back into millage, which should come back out to 4.99, which is the exact ask as before.
It may not come out to exactly 499, based on the valuation at the time, so.
But
just-
very, very close.
It's gonna be close, it's not like one's gonna be 6 mils and the other one's gonna be 4.99. It's gonna be, there's gonna be a small range of difference.
But the idea is to make it exact, to make the tax burden the same, if that makes sense.
Yes, right.
Make the tax burden the same. The difference is, this could be a 5-year, or this could be a 10-year, that's another determination you'll have to make tonight. So what is the impact of that? So what you're looking at right now is the projected election cycle. So fiscal year 20, on the ballot for new money, 22, 2 renewals, 23 renewal, 24 new money and a renewal, 28 new money and a renewal, 29 renewal, 30 renewal, 32 renewal, 33 new money renewal, 34 renewal, 38 new money renewal, and 39 renewal. And I'll turn it over to Bill just to give an explanation of what the ramification of that is from a financial perspective.
Yep, so Moody's is a credit rating agency. They are one of 3. You have Moody's, you have Fitch, and you have Standard & Poor's. Those credit rating agencies assign a credit score. We all have numbers as a credit score, districts get letters. Moody's considers time-bound levies as risky. Why? Because at any point in time, an emergency levy can go away completely, and the district would lose 8, 9, 10% of its budget. Consequently, as a result of 5 emergency levies, this is the copy of the Moody's report, we are assigned a credit rating 1 notch lower than we otherwise would be had we been on all continuing levies. And here's a quote from Moody's. Credit challenges. Reliance on voter renewal of multiple outstanding operating levies to maintain stable financial operations. Basically what that means is, we're going to assign you a lower credit rating, and you will be assessed a higher interest rate. So, the rating is sacrosanct to issuers who frequently find themselves in need of financing via the capital markets. So basically it's saying that these reports and our financial stability is very important to the credit markets. And as such, we have a lower credit rating, and the resulting increase to the taxpayers for the 3 new buildings is $5,833,623. Let's call it $6 million because that's easier to remember. So because we have 5 emergency levies, the taxpayers of this community are going to pay $6 million more for the new buildings than they otherwise would have had we been on continuing levies. Now, I'm in the process of trying to refinance a portion of the bond debt and a portion of our unvoted debt. That is at risk. If another time-bound levy is requested by the community and is passed by the community, our financial situation becomes that much riskier. Our interest rates will go up consequently, and our credit rating will go down. It will blow away any attempt by me to refinance anything, because it won't make any financial sense, because our credit rating is too low to do it. So the district and the taxpayers will have to forego millions of dollars in interest savings, because I will not be able to refinance any of the debt. And that will apply to any future refinancings. Refinancing debt is a common practice with school districts and government entities. Cities do it as well as schools. So because of having time-bound levies, you are foregoing interest rate savings, millions of dollars of interest rate savings into the future. And by having as many renewals as Steve has laid out, that's incredibly costly.
And that's compounded by the fact that every time we're on the ballot in odd years, we're paying anywhere from $30,000 to $90,000 additionally to the Board of Elections to run that levy. So since 1986, we've been on the ballot 29 times.
Since 1987, 29 times.
29 times, and that's to the tune of a little over $500,000 in fees that we've paid to be on the ballot.
All the school districts, not to say school districts don't pass emergency levies, they do. And not to say school districts in this county haven't passed emergency levies, they have. We are the only ones in this county that primarily rely on time-bound levies. The only continuing levy we have is from 1976. And the dollars that that Board of Education requested in 1976 is generating the exact same dollar amount today as it was in 1976. That dollar amount has not moved in 40-some years. And in effect, the emergency levies have not been voted down. So, in effect, they've been continuing, but the taxpayers have shelled out $30,000 to $90,000 a pop in odd number of years to continually have time-bound levies. There's only one other district in the entire state of Ohio that primarily relies on time-bound levies, and that district has 10. All the other districts in the state of Ohio, over 600, rely on continuing operating levies. It doesn't cost the taxpayer any more or any less to have a continuing levy or an emergency levy. They're both going to generate roughly the same amount of dollars. Your taxes don't automatically go up from year to year because it's a continuing levy. Your tax rates will move in inverse of value. So if values go up, your tax rate's going down. Your values go down, your tax rate's going to go up. The dollars have to stay the same, continuing or emergency. Doesn't matter.
So we surveyed the community. So with all that being said, it would sound like that I or the treasurer is making a recommendation to be an emergency operating levy. So what does the community, or excuse me, a continuing operating levy? So what does the community believe? What you're looking at right here is just a summary of asking the straight up question. I believe the levy should be about split slightly higher. Renewal levy, meaning an emergency operating levy, was 51.39%. Those thinking it should be continuing or permanent was 46.86%. But what's important to note here, the majority of the respondents from this survey are parents. So these are generally, I'm projecting my own belief into this, but I believe the majority of these people that responded are yes voters. So what you've done, in effect, or what this survey has done, is split your yes vote in half. That would have otherwise, does that make sense? Are you following me? I believe the majority of people that took this survey were parents. I know they were parents. They were mostly parents. Parents, I'm making an assumption here that most parents are yes voters, and I know it's an assumption, but statistically that's true. So historically that's true. So if that is accurate, if that assumption is even close to accurate, it would be like surveying your yes voters and having half of them say, if you make it this kind of levy, I'm voting no. So, just FYI. The second one was, this is a summary of how they responded to what kind of levy do you think we should be placing on the ballot, continuing versus operating. So under emergency operating levy, these are the comments in general. The general consensus was it will pass, need to play it safe, thinking a time-bound levy is the safe play. No voters will vote for this. I don't know if that's true or not. Pass this and bring things back to our kids. That was the general consensus from those that thought we should do an emergency operating levy. Those that thought it should be a continuing operating levy said it's best for the community, but it won't pass. Start campaigning now. People won't support this, and it's the right thing to do. I don't disagree with that from a fiscal perspective. Why did people vote yes or no? The people that said the biggest reasons people voted yes was good for kids, renewal levies are bad, support the schools in the community, investment in the future, pay it forward, attended a meeting and know the facts, the school needs the money. The belief that why people voted no was uninformed, ballot language was confusing, it certainly was. Living on a fixed income, angry, new buildings are enough, bond issue confusion, too much money. So can cuts return based upon the March levy passage? We've seen this before. So the answer is what? The answer's neither yes, no. If it's just a straight up can they return with no additional cuts, the answer is no. The only way they can return is if we replace those cuts with other cuts. Because if not, we're gonna really hurt ourselves in just a few years down the road,
So House Bill 305, we're talking 1.3 million, is that
roughly.
roughly,
Yeah.
either way, whatever?
Mhm.
And that forecast right there is counting on getting 1.3 from them.
This forecast
By
is
March?
1.2, no,
Starting in
2022.
fiscal 22, because
22,
the
Okay.
budget that Governor DeWine signed is good for 2020 and 2021.
okay?
I don't think Governor is interested in altering his two-year state budget. I could be wrong. But the assumption that Steve and I are making is the new budget period for 22-23 will include House Bill 305. Not to say that the state can't change their mind, but that's just our assumption right now is the new budget for 22.
And that's a risky assumption. That's 1.2 million in cuts in House Bill 305. Not enough. 1.2 million in cuts won't do it. Survey Monkey, if you were restoring items that have been cut, what would you bring back and what would you cut in its place? They would bring back, and these are in the order, these are pretty much in the order that they appeared. Busing, middle school SRO, middle school sports, all supplementals, band and music, which is all supplementals, and Soy High School last. At the bottom of, and you're going to get a presentation in January, at the very bottom, which isn't even listed here, was Crossroads. I think that's really for two reasons that I think Crossroads was last. I think it's lack of understanding of what Crossroads does. And Crossroads, I think, viewed by some, when push comes to shove, well, my kid isn't seeing Crossroads, so therefore I rank it low. But when you ask people, is safety important? It's number two. Number two. So if you look at the research, school districts are doing one of two things, and I believe we're doing both. They're either hardening their schools, which is a paramilitary approach, or they're trying to stop the problems before they occur, which is through mental health, relationships, and counseling of students that are showing every shooter that's ever been out there, they always report, well, we saw that one coming, and they list all these things that this kid was going through. Or kids. We're doing both. We're hardening facilities and meeting mental health needs. So we're trying to figure out a way that we could keep mental health services or some level of mental health services and still meet our budgetary goals. I don't have the answer for you tonight on that, other than to say we are trying to work that out. I think, even though it's surveyed low, I think it's desperately important. That's my bias. What can you do? You can go to supportweschools.org and help spread the right information. The more people are informed, the more powerful the message is. So that's where we are. My personal recommendation, at this point I'm not speaking for the treasurer, I'm speaking for myself. My recommendation is that it is a 10-year emergency operating levy, that after a successful March levy, that we continue the momentum of understanding of how these which would be emergency operating levy number 6, how these emergency operating levies negatively impact the future of our district, and I would submit to you at some point incredibly jeopardizing this district's ability to fund itself, that we would take a couple of weeks off and then come right back and start campaigning and try to be on the ballot in November for a substitute levy, which a substitute levy would replace the emergency operating levies and not increase taxes. But that's gonna take a lot of education for people to understand. But if we ever had any momentum, my personal belief is it is now. And for me, the only way I can digest the idea of doing something I know is financially not the prudent thing to do is if we had a plan in place. Personal opinion. But obviously tonight, the decision is how do you move forward? So I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Treasurer.
I know, we're all looking at you, Bill.
I've said a million times that the emergency levies are they're financially unstable. You know, the Moody's report is the strongest evidence that I have. And the district is gonna lose out in millions of dollars in interest savings potentially. I'm afraid that the refunding that I've been working on will probably die. If there's a way to save it, I'll try. But that's all gonna depend on a conversation with Moody's. And then going forward, obviously with 6 time-bound levies, the credit report speaks for itself. It just becomes that much more unstable. And honestly, the finances become very complex with 6 time-bound levies and having to know when they're going to expire and renew, and it becomes difficult. It becomes extraordinarily difficult with 6 time-bound levies.
And I don't disagree with a single word he said.
So, does it put us, I mean, I agree with everything so far. There's no doubt in my mind. An emergency levy is not in the best interest of the financial of this district. However, looking at the reality and the emails that we've gotten and I've gotten and the phone calls and that kind of stuff, you know, it's been made pretty clear that a lot of people aren't gonna vote for it if we do the continuing. So, knowing that and knowing, I mean, if this levy doesn't pass in March, it's devastating. So tell us about that. So this levy, whatever way we put it up, either way, and it fails, what does that mean for this school district?
5 million more in cuts on top of the 2 million we've already made. Do you think the first 2 million were painful? What do you think 5 million more is gonna look like?
Okay,
What's probably gonna happen is the May 5-year forecast will be due. I will submit to the state of Ohio a very ugly 5-year forecast. They're going to probably pick up the phone and call me, and probably tell me we're gonna be potentially in fiscal watch or caution within a very short period of time. They may follow it up with a letter. Typically what they'll do is they will send a letter to the school board president, the school treasurer, and the superintendent, and they will ask, how is the district going to get itself out of the deficit without renewal levies and without new money? They're gonna wanna look at cuts.
So the district has put forth cuts that would happen in March,
Yeah.
including academics and class sizes and all kinds of crazy,
It's
terrible
devastating.
things for the children. Okay, so we've done that, but this is on top of that. So what's the difference between caution and watch and,
So, let's see, I believe it goes caution, watch, emergency.
okay.
Caution is you're gonna face a deficit of 2%.
Mhm.
Watch is between 2 and 8%, and emergency is, I think you're over that threshold.
When we entered watch, previously in 2011, we had to submit a financial recovery plan.
Right, it has to
Which is
memorialize by resolution, correct?
It does, and it was a pretty significant document. that simply put, they came, they sat down with us and they said, how much are you gonna cut? And show us the impact on your 5-year forecast, and they didn't say stop cutting until it was a positive number.
That's probably what will happen.
And the first thing they'll look at is, are you at state minimums? So for example, a lot of the things that we say we want back, they're not required. You know, we have a drone class, which is a really popular class. We have a mobile fabrication lab that goes around to our elementaries and our middle schools, which I think is incredibly important for today's students to prepare them for the world that they're entering, but it's not required. So just think about all the things that aren't required, and they cut you to state minimums in staffing, which we're not much above, quite frankly. At this point, to cut staffing means to cut course offerings. We're already teaching 6 periods, which is more than anybody else is teaching, which was part of our way out of our hole in 2011. So, we've cut anything that was easy to pick off, and things that weren't easy to pick off were done in 2012.
And so the sum total of phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 cuts are 8.5, in that range. That will get us through 2024.
That will get us through 2024, okay.
The idea is the cuts were to equal whatever money we were to get if we passed in 19 or 20. So that gets to 24, but after that, it has to be levied.
A large levy.
Another new levy.
Because
For a large amount of money.
part of what going into fiscal emergency means is the school board is sidelined. A body comes in and takes over the operation of the school district, sets the minimum standards. We can't authorize a purchase order without the approval of that body.
They will probably give the district a loan. And that's one of the things that Steve and I have mentioned at multiple levy meetings, is if we're in fiscal emergency, the second they are done cutting what they need to cut, they're gonna come right over here and they're gonna say, pass a levy. And it's not gonna be 5 mils, because 5 mils is what we were. They loaned us money, that has to be paid back, so there's millage. And then the state's gonna say, guys, we don't wanna be back here cutting again. So you're gonna need to pass up here. So now we're in double digits, 10, 15 mils. I'm just ballparking it.
I would guess it would be easily 10 mils. And try, good luck passing that.
And the 10 mils doesn't bring back what is cut. All it does is gets the district to a positive balance so that it can survive for 5, 6, 7 years. That's it. And then, guess what? In 5 to 7 years, the district will be right back on the ballot. If you want things restored, back on more millage. It's better to pass now than it is down the road. So much better, believe me.
Because we're just getting deeper, creating deeper.
I came from a district where we finished the year with $10,000. That is ugly, trust me. It's ugly. We don't want to be there. You know, the 5-year forecast, they're guide rails. Things may change, change positively. And maybe the 2 million deficit in 2024 becomes positive, which would be great. But it's not gonna go from negative 2 million to positive 20 million. Maybe it becomes a positive 2 million, or 3 million, or 4 million. But all that means is, we still have to be on the ballot in 2025 or 2024. All it does is it shores up the finances for a very short period of time. It doesn't mean the district is in greener pastures and everything is all good. It just means that, okay, our financial situation has improved a little bit. You know, think of the forecast as a pendulum, right? So if this is 2020 and things change a little bit in 2020, you know, look, you know, my arm moves a whole lot at the end. So if something changes a little bit here, it's gonna have a drastic impact in 2024. So, yeah, maybe we get some good news, okay, balance comes up. We get some bad news, whoop, goes way down. That's how the impact of the forecast operates.
God bless you. Thanks, Bill. Any other questions for the superintendent or the treasurer? Okay. Well, we are here to vote on a resolution, and the first resolution in front of us is Resolution D, a resolution declaring the necessity of submitting to the electors of the school district of the question of levying an additional tax pursuant to sections 5705 and 1.194 and 5705.197 of the revised code. This resolution, just to be clear, is an emergency levy,
Yes, it is.
and it has a time limit of,
That,
is our discussion.
yes, Mrs. Warner, it's, oh, no, I'm sorry, it's for 10 years.
Okay.
Yep,
10 years.
$8.5 million for 10 years, yes.
Right, so that is the first resolution that we, that it is the resolution we need to vote on. So I'm looking for a motion for the passage of Resolution D.
Madam President,
Mr. Jones,
I motion to approve item 1D, a resolution declaring the necessity of submitting to the electors of the school district the question of levying an additional tax pursuant to sections 5705.194 to 5705.197 of the revised code.
thank you, Mr. Jones. Is there a second?
Madam President,
Mrs. Zern,
I will second the motion.
thank you. It's been moved and seconded that we approve item 1D, the resolution declaring the necessity of putting this tax in front of the voters. Is there any discussion? Mrs. Perchinsky.
Yes, based upon my upcoming vote here, I know in my mind, my brain, what's the right way to go. And I see Bill's face, but I know how I'm about to vote is that it's what the community wants. And I see my kids' faces who are in 9th grade, twins. And I see the children's faces because we've lost so much, we can't afford to lose anymore. So my hope is like Steve, Mr. Thompson, and Mr. Parkinson has said again, I'm sorry, Bill.
No,
You know,
I don't
It's
misunderstand.
a tough
I understand.
position to be in, but I promise, once I'm, coming next year, I promise and I hope along with the community, we can continue as a team to educate the people out there, whether it's on social media or whoever we're in conversations with, to understand not just this levy in March, but future levies. And as Steve said, let's keep the momentum going so that people are educated as to, in the long run, it's gonna hurt us, and I don't think everyone gets that still, so. My vote is based upon my kids and the children of the district.
Thank you, Mrs. Perchinsky. Anyone else? Mrs. Zern?
I can say that I concur with Mrs. Perchinsky, and I as well, I'm a parent in the district, but I think even though it's not the best financial thing for an emergency levy, it's my hope that a substitute levy in the future will be able to consolidate some of those emergency levies. The Survey Monkey was good, but I think 51% to 47-ish, that's really tight. And we tried for a substitute levy once and that didn't work, and then we tried 2 times to pass a continuing levy. And it's a financial predicament right now, that if we don't pass it, it's not gonna be a good financial place. But it does come with pitfalls as well.
Thank you, Mrs. Zern.
Madam President,
Dr.
I
Beal.
also agree with the things that Steve and Bill have told us tonight. To me, I don't wanna go through another night like we did about a month ago, where we had the programming for students. And, in some respects, this truly is no difference.
Thank you, Dr. Beal. Mr. Jones?
Yes, I agree with everybody and everything that everyone said so far.
have to agree with everyone else, and I would recommend that the board next year form a finance committee and be a part of this at a level with Mr. Parkinson and really work to get these substitute levies passed and get us on the right track at have a good plan. And education, you're in the business, we're in the business of education, so we've got to try to educate the public as much as we can. I know that this is not the right thing to do, what I'm gonna vote for, either for the big picture, and I'm a big picture thinker, but I realize that we have to do something to keep things kind of normal for our children. And education is education, books and all that, but that other stuff that we've cut is very important to lots and lots of kids and makes a difference to them. So I won't expound any more. No more discussion? Hearing none, Mr. Parkinson, will you call the roll?
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mrs. Zimmerman?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
Yeah.
Mrs. Brzezinski?
Yes.
Excuse me, Mrs. Warner?
Yes, motion has carried. Second motion, which I will read, and it can die on the floor, or we could vote on it also.
Mr. Manilow, the Square Path Laws, just advised if should resolution A pass, then the board not take up a first or second motion, just nothing happens.
Okay, should I read it then, and
It can,
I really don't want to, but I will. Resolution 1E is a resolution declaring it necessary to levy an additional tax for the purpose of current expenses and requesting the Lake County Auditor to certify the total current tax value of the school district and the value amount of the dollar amount of revenue that would be generated by the additional levy pursuant to sections 5705.03 and 5705.21 of the revised code. And this would have been the resolution that would have put the continuing levy back up there.
This, if you like, I can read Mr. Manilow's exact wording.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. Let's tell him who Mr. Manilow is.
He's a bond lawyer for Squire Patton Boggs. He helps me with levy language and debt financing. So Mr. Manilow said, the board will not need to vote down the resolution, i.e. item number E, that is not selected. It will die a natural death for lack of motion and second. The minutes of the meeting will reflect the fact that it was on the agenda and discussed, along with the resolution that is selected, but was not put forward for a vote.
Thank you. And Mr. Manilow is brilliant.
Oh, yes.
Very
He's the smartest guy.
Yeah. Okay, there is no other public business to be held tonight. I'm looking for a motion to adjourn to an executive session to consider the appointment, employment, dismissal, discipline, demotion, or compensation of public employees or officials. Is there a motion?
Madam President,
Mrs. Schinsky.
I make that motion to adjourn to executive session to consider the appointment, employment, dismissal, discipline, promotion, demotion, or compensation of a public employee or official.
Thank you, Mrs. Schinsky. Is there a second?
Madam President.
Dr. Beal. Thank you. It's been moved and seconded that we adjourn to executive session. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, Mr. Parkinson, will you call the roll?
Mrs. Brzezinski?
Yes.
Dr. Beal?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mrs. Zimmerman?
Yes.
And Mrs. Warner?
Yes, motion is carried. It is 7:53, but I don't have my 7:52. I suppose. There will be no other business after we finish the executive session, so you are free to get bundled up and head home. Thank you, and hope to see you at all the levy committee meetings.